Joining us now is an agribusiness analyst, Dr. Olukayode Oyeleye. It's nice to have you join us, Dr. Oyeleye.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's nice being here.
Yeah, fine. Now, the point there is some people would say, as much as this is a trying time for the world, it might be a good time for agribusiness. Talk to us how farmers how this is going to impact on farmers generally.
Yeah, to every cloud there's a silver lining. And in this case, because people must eat, whether or not they go out on everyday basis, they have to eat, except for those who are fasting. And the fasting also will have a limit. So at the end of the fast, people will still have to go back to get something to eat. So to that extent, yes, of course, it affords farmers very good opportunities. We will look at it both at the local and the global context. First and foremost, if we look at it at the local context, we realize that, of course, at this point in time, the tendency is for families and individuals to stockpile food. Now, what is going to happen in the short term is the existing stocks will be exhausted, as it were, or probably maybe a lot of it will be drawn up, and then there will be a need to replenish the stock. So that will create a very big business opportunity for the local farmers. But again, there's going to be a gap here that needs to be emphasized. In the agro industry in Nigeria, information is still a very big issue. That is to say, between the primary producers and the market. And so there's an opportunity here, really. But what is likely to happen is that speculators and the so-called middlemen may take a very big advantage of this to the detriment of both the producers and the consumers. So that's one of the gaps that we need to watch out for. And let me leave it at that point for now, and then talk briefly about the global context. We're aware presently that there have been lockdown in many countries of the world, in Italy, in Spain, Britain is considering that. Of course, US is already implementing that, and so many other developed countries. Now, what is going to happen is that because of the fact that there had been panic buying and people had been stockpiling in all those countries, again, tropical foods that they consume in these countries will also need to be replenished after some time. And those tropical foods come from Africa, from some parts of Asia, and some, so many other places in the world. Now, Nigeria needs to take a very good advantage of this. And I need to emphasize the fact that we have advantages here. If we look at Europe, for instance, let's talk specifically about UK. Lagos is 6 hours flight to London. And so you want to talk about the nearness to UK, for instance, which is an advantage for us compared to some other countries that export, like some of these Southeast Asian countries that export tropical foods, to Britain. We have a very big advantage here, which we need to begin to talk about.
But now that the international
airspace are closed, everybody, their borders are closed now.
At the end, it will get to a point that there would be a reassessment of the situation, and because one, you cannot shut down the airports for far too long. You cannot stop the aviation business for far too long, because one, it's going to have a ripple effect on the economy, definitely, because one, we've got to a point, in the world today that traveling has become an integral part of our daily lives, and a lot of businesses are transacted in such a way that when you look at the global supply chain, you would find that a lot of goods, especially those that are processed, the raw materials are coming from one part of the world, and the end products are actually being churned out from another part of the world. So, and many of these depend more on aviation, especially those that are not too heavy. Heavy products will have to go by the sea. But okay, you want to say something?
Yes, I wanted to just quickly throw in a question, because we need to wrap up this as soon as possible.
Okay.
Now, I'll bring it back home. Looking at Nigeria, basically, there are fears of food insecurity for some persons, looking at the population. And if we have to grind everything to a halt, I want you to address that aspect. We have not been able to meet that food sufficiency.
Well, even in normal times, there have been, problems with regards to food sufficiency, not to talk about when there's a lockdown, a national lockdown. Now, I think this affords those in authorities an opportunity to reassess the situation and think about institutional frameworks that will make things to work, not necessarily even solving the present problem, but thinking about should things like emergencies, it may take some other forms in the future. Some other emergencies may arise that will also lead to this kind of lockdown or restrict people's movement. How do we ensure food is available for the generality of the people? So this is an opportunity for those in authorities to sit down, look at the situation, turn it inside out, and begin to think about how to prevent, this kind of food insecurity problem arising as a result of, anything that will severely restrict people's movement in the future.
All right, we have to leave you here now. Dr. Olukayode Oyeleye, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Joining us now is an agribusiness analyst, Dr. Olukayode Oyeleye. It's nice to have you join us right now.
Good to be here.
You're
Great.
welcome.
Thank you.
Now, we are where we are already, and these are the realities of the times. How can farmers take advantage of this? Because there's obviously going to be the spike in the demand for food and agro-business generally. How would farmers take advantage of this?
Okay, let's begin with this. In a crisis situation like this, we will begin to talk about the staples which most Nigerians consume. Staple crops that you and I know, like yam, like cassava-based products, sorghum, corn, rice, and so on and so forth. Now, interestingly, there are commodity associations that have members all over the country. This is a time for them to actually wake up and begin to now operationalize, the functions of the commodity associations, for the benefit of the people as well as for the benefit of their members. One of the problems which we presently have is that not many of our activities in the agri sector are data-driven. And so a lot of guesstimates are being done in various aspects as to volume of production, locations, and so many other things like that. So those who have commodity associations should be able to leverage on the strength in them right now. So that will help to a greater extent, because we now should be talking about aggregation of commodities. And then, of course, local logistics, for us to be able to get products from the sources to, the areas where they are consumed and stuff like, where they're consumed and stuff like that. So that's one of the things we should be talking about. Then, of course, we should be talking about issues that have to do with, what can actually be done now that we are moving, to the rainy season. We should begin to think about how farmers should get back to the field very quickly. And then some crops that can be cultivated more than once in a year. We should think about how can we do more than one cycle within this year, because it's possible. In 2012, something close to this was done when the dry season rice farming was introduced. And I think it paid off so well because the flood at that time, it created a panic situation. But quickly, the government of the day rose to the challenge. And then, of course, there was a lot of massive interventions that got people into dry season rice farming. In other words,
and irrigation.
Yes,
also
of course. So, in other words, it created even business opportunities because the farmers that would have been idle during the dry season got busy. So, government therefore needs to begin to think about what kind of stimulus package should be given to the farmers. You can walk through the commodity association, weak as they may be, and even help to see how to make them effective and strengthen them. So that's one of the things we should be looking at. Another thing, again, we should be talking about is, apart from the commodity association, cooperatives, farmers cooperatives, and all over the country, we have cooperatives. And then what are their strong points? How can we take advantage of this? Is also one thing that we should be looking at this point in time, because it's very, very important. It's not enough for these farmers to just have cooperatives because of they make contributions, and all that. They should be thinking about how can this translate to helping to solve a problem that is presently existing. So that's another. Then, okay.
Quickly, before you move on, there's an aspect that I think that we are not looking at, because we're talking about, okay, there shouldn't be a gathering of certain persons, because we're also trying to curtail the spread of the virus as much as we want to grow, farm as much as possible. How do we begin to navigate through these challenges? How can farmers navigate through these challenges? Because even in some areas, we're still talking about security issues. They can't go back to their farms.
Yeah, let's talk about the more secure parts of the country. Now, how to navigate around this situation. Farms are usually very vast. You can have 100 farmers on maybe some 30, 40 hectares of land without necessarily getting close. So if they must be on the field,
but they use
possible.
the same tools for farming.
Yeah, but still, there are ways. I mean, I've been on the farm for years, so I know what we're talking about here.
All right.
So it's very possible for a large number of people to be on the farms. They could walk in separate places without necessarily getting close. That is number one. Then number two, in terms of communicating, if they want to meet, you can have voice a call on phones, for instance. So you can have audio conferencing on your phone. You can also take advantage of WhatsApp. You can use Facebook and all of that.
Yeah,
to
but
have your meetings
how much
and
of
share
that?
ideas.
How much of that does the average Nigerian farmer know about? The point there is, here in Lagos, for instance, there are some people who still don't believe there's coronavirus, who don't know what to do and all of that. We've seen some of the videos we played earlier on. Even churches, there are some churches that are still resistant to the issue of stay at home. For the farmer who is a little bit isolated, if I have to put it that way, not totally, but who is concerned on the farm, how much of awareness about how to and how not to do they know?
Okay, like I mentioned, cooperatives and commodity associations, these groups can also be used to pass this relevant and critical information across to their members. It's very important, it's very possible. For instance, now we have a group called AFAN in Nigeria. This is one of the times when they should wake up to be able to use their strength, to actually pass, critical information to their members all over the country. In fact, I think they have their members up to local government levels. So they should be able to take advantage of this, to get information across. But you are making a point which I actually want to elaborate upon very quickly. There are small-scale farmers, no doubt about that, and there are those that are in rural communities. There's no doubt about that. But today, Nigeria is already having a critical mass of medium to large-scale farmers, going by African standard. And so many of them are educated. They have a laptop and they have iPad like you have. Some of them even have more sophisticated ones than you do. And then of course they do communicate the world over. So some of them also have access to commodity prices of products, local and international. So these are the people that can take the leadership. But then what I'm trying to say here now is, apart from the effort from the private sector that is limited by a number of factors, the government that is more able to have far-reaching influence should come in to support them so that they can be able to impact positively. But then a program like emergency intervention should be embarked upon by the federal government now, without any delay, and in anticipation of food crisis that may occur later in the year, because the symptoms may not be manifest now, but in the next couple of months, we may begin to see the symptoms showing, phases. And so that is why the government must really look at agricultural sector now and then think about some of these points we are trying to make and how to make them really impact on the food security situation in the country. All right, we have to leave it here now. Thank you very much, Dr. Olukayode Oyeleye, for your insight.
Joining us now is an agribusiness analyst, Dr. Olukayode Oyeleye. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Thank you.
Now, the way the virus is spreading, there are fears that there could be an agricultural disruption if proper measures are not put in place. Paint us a vivid picture of what could happen and what this could disrupt.
Okay, now we've been talking about lockdown, restriction of movement and all of that. Definitely it will affect those who are involved in the agricultural sector. To what extent it will affect those in the rural communities, we may not be able to tell right now because many villages are very small, and then of course in terms of sizes and population, so some people just take a walk across to their farms and all that. But those who are in the suburban and those who are living in the core of the urban centers, who are involved one way or the other in agriculture, it will definitely affect their movement because many would have to travel way into their farms to go and see what is happening, and then those that have to use laborers and those who are not fully mechanized will have to hire laborers. So to a very great extent, it's going to affect production, and when it affects production, it is going to affect the agro-processing companies that depend on the raw materials for these. It's going to affect families that depend on the material, the produce coming directly from the farm, for the household, and then of course it would affect the transporters. It will affect many people whose work are directly or indirectly linked to agriculture, definitely. So it's going to affect them. It's going to affect even those who are in the market selling. So these are some of the problems. And then of course we would look at things like, okay, if you want to look at something like, let me use soybean as an example, because of the dampening market, in China now, which is the biggest off-taker of soybean in the world, the two countries exporting to them, to China, like US and Brazil, they would have trouble actually getting their soya to China right now. And so whichever country is ready to take might have to, they might have to sell at very low prices. Even if they are producing in Nigeria, the cost, when you compare, might make it unfavorable for those local producers to be able to sell. That's one. Let's use poultry as another example. And you look at poultry production. Definitely, you need to be around your poultry, 24/7.
Poultry, fishery.
Fisheries and stuff like that. So it's going to affect those who are producing these, definitely. So when you look at this, it's going to be a big, big problem. Right. So we need to now look at a robust strategy that will address the smallholders, the medium scale, the large scale, those who are producing crops, those who are producing staples, vegetables, the perishables generally, and those who are producing live, animals like fish, like poultry, and of course even, ruminants generally. And it's going to also affect even the itinerant farmers, like the nomads, for instance. So it's a big problem we have in our hands.
All right, as it is right now, we've often heard of farmers not having access to enough capital, even if there is capital or credit, not having enough. Now it brings us to the issue of cooperative societies coming together, pulling resources and ideas together to be able to stand at times like this. What should the farmers, because an average Nigerian farmer is more of a subsistent farmer than the mechanized, even though mechanized farming is coming upstream a little bit and all of that. But what is your advice in that regard right now?
Okay, let's look at the official intervention, because this is very critical here. This is a time you begin to talk about calling up government to actually come to the rescue, because there are many things the farmers will not be able to get. Banks generally will be looking at the risk factors at this point in time, so they'll be very, very reluctant to lend, even when the projects look promising. The problems, of the unforeseen would make them to want to, hold back. So they may not be able to access money from commercial banks. That's number one. Then, of course, we have the Bank of Agric. Right now, if the Bank of Agric were to be vibrant, we should be talking about the Bank of Agric, which is, we should be looking at it like the one in India, for instance. There's also an agricultural bank in India. If you are looking at the way it is operating, this is the time the Bank of Agric should have come to the rescue, for instance. So, and then of course, you should be talking about the CBN, for instance, has been doing quite some things in trying to assist agriculture. So we will still need the CBN, in some ways to see how to intervene in this particular situation. Now the cooperatives, well, all they need to do at this point in time is you first of all, sit back, identify what are the critical areas that need intervention, and then be able to harmonize your position. It will now make whatever intervention that will come from the government easier. But then I need to say this, that the government also must proactively engage rather than waiting for these people to come, because it will come back to the government if nothing is done from that perspective.
All right, we'll leave it here now. Yeah. Dr. Olukayode Oyeleye, thank you for speaking with us.
My pleasure.